Very glad today to be talking to John Reed. He's just taken on an expanded role within Microsoft as Director of Automotive Solutions globally. Today, John has kindly agreed to go through some of the key challenges that we see from the COVID-19, also where we see some of the key trends in automotive solutions. So, John, thank you very much.
Thanks, David. Glad to be here.
So last time we had you in a discussion, John, was with one of our customers and with our CEO, Johan, talking about what was the middle of the COVID crisis, the worst of the lockdown. And we spoke a bit then about the importance of having systems that were resilient, but also systems that were very agile, which allowed you as a company to take account of the, let's use the term, unknown unknowns, so that you can react quickly when things come up that maybe you haven't planned for.
Right.
So since that point in time, John, what other trends have you been seeing that maybe have been caused by COVID or have been accelerated or decelerated by COVID?
In the midst of COVID, I think we found many of our customers, like Brimborg, evaluating how they could respond in a very flexible fashion to the challenges that were being presented. Having employees work from home, customers that were interested in shopping, taking delivery, receiving services from home or at a safe distance, as well as finding ways to innovate in areas where the business has slowed down, creating perhaps new opportunities to sell or market or potentially rent vehicles from a fleet standpoint. And so that trend has continued as we've seen the months unfold since that discussion. One of the key things we've seen in most markets globally is an interest in expanding on the level of digital experience available to customers and giving them additional control or flexibility. They're also finding that customers are very interested in keeping that flexibility, even in those environments where the dealership, showroom, or service departments open up. So that flexibility, both to deliver digital services, but also to innovate in the business model, creates a kind of safety net for risk in the business. In other terms, given that we may not know fully what the range of experiences and services a customer may need, either now or in the future, and as the business may shift, potentially in the future to mobility services or introducing kind of new ways of engaging customers, whether it's a health and an economic crisis or simply responding to customer demand, we're seeing a need to provide the technical capabilities to allow the managers of the business to adapt. And that trend just seems to have been accelerated really as a consequence of COVID. So we're kind of addressing customer need on one hand by offering personalization, but at the same time creating opportunities for business owners and managers to be more flexible about how they design and implement those new processes along with the systems that they have, such as Annata 365.
Now, that's really interesting, John. I think you touched on a number of things that we're definitely seeing in the market around the ability to blue sky think. If you're constrained by your system, it limits the sort of new business that you can go after. So this agility is obviously key. People still want to buy cars, they still want to move about, and they're just finding ways to get around the current problems rather than just giving up. But of course, the fundamentals of investment are still the same. You're still looking at, does this decrease my cost? Does this increase revenue, increase customer satisfaction? These things have been around a long time. But I think one component that's been at the periphery, but actually I think is a fundamental thing to think about when making your investment choices, is risk. You can talk about risk in different ways and you can allocate risk to cost or to revenue, but I think it's useful to look at risk as a standalone factor when deciding your system.
I think you hit on a key theme there, which is that the sort of adaptability to the business needs, whether it's people, process, or technology, is going to be affected by those dynamics. Many of us have implemented systems without the organization being ready, but in many cases, the organization or the customers or the business processes are ready to evolve, but the systems hold them back. And so as we look at risk and sort of quantify it, one of the key factors is recognizing that as the industry changes, not only in terms of customer experience in traditional private ownership models. The industry begins to introduce new mobility experiences, some by dealers, some by manufacturers, some by third parties coming into the market for the first time. The people in the process can adapt, but the systems really need to provide a high degree of integration across different departments, a high degree of data and intelligence about consumers and operations. And so in order to de-risk the future, it's important to make strategic decisions around the technology so that that becomes an enabler for the changes that the business wants to introduce rather than a point of friction. One of the things that we at Microsoft have been impressed about Annata, both from the technology as well as the partnerships that you have with your customers, is that you've been able to create that technical fabric in a very practical fashion, introduce the things that the organizations need, create the right level of technical innovation, but create the right sockets for future development. And that's been a great way of de-risking these landscapes where it's not possible to know where everything needs to go, but just know fundamentally that you have the flexibility in the technical systems to adapt along with the people in the process.
I think that flexibility is very important, and it sort of talks to the next conversation that people want to have with us, and I guess with Microsoft. So it's been, I think, 3 or 4 years since Microsoft went cloud all in. Microsoft leads the market, but we are definitely seeing customers who, when they're making these decisions around their infrastructure, clearly are taking a cloud first approach. But they're coming from a point of heavily customized on-premise systems, many of which have been developed over 20, 30 years. And when they look to the move to the cloud, they just see a world of pain and a world of risk. So they're very cautious about what they change around their core line of business applications. And what we are very keen to discuss with them is the fact that with the prevalence of data centers and the homogeneous nature of the products, they are able, during this phase of transition, not only to move to a new system with all the benefits that that provides, but also relatively standardize the system across the world. Now, many people are concerned about taking what they see as their traditional ERP system and replacing that. And the case that we make with Dynamics, with the common data model, with the solution accelerator that we built together, we just see there's a relatively painless way to do that by taking some of the components, basing it on the customer engagement, and providing whatever is best for that customer engagement, and then connecting that into the existing on-premise infrastructure, if that's something you cannot bear to give up anytime soon. Do you see that same landscape in other places, John?
Yeah, we do. And I think kind of going back to your point around the ability to intermix both legacy as well as new technologies. If we go back and look at Microsoft's journey to the cloud, one of the key tenets of our strategy at the very beginning was this idea of creating hybrid implementations. And what we found, not only in kind of core cloud services, but also in the business application space, it's very important to create opportunities for customers to progress in their own digital transformation and the underlying systems in a pace and with a roadmap that suits their business requirement. And one of the things I think that's been very powerful in the relationship between Microsoft and Annata is that as we've looked at demand globally in the automotive retail space, what we've recognized is a kind of a key hybrid case where there's a strong interest on the part of retailers or national sales companies, distributors, and manufacturers to improve the customer journey, all the factors of COVID, for example, and driving more digital experiences, more kind of data and AI-driven business processes, and ultimately to provide a personalized experience for consumers. And so we've been able to show the market as Microsoft and Annata together that it's possible to intermix legacy systems with new technologies, as well as kind of utilize the investments that you've made, not only in Dynamics, but also in the common data model and Power Platform. You can augment around those systems as well in a very flexible fashion. There's an embedded advantage, I think, that Annata has created in the way that you design your systems, and that's that as customers recognize that there are additional needs in the business, you can draw on the broad portfolio of technologies that you've built. Now, I'll give you a great example. We've worked in the past with customers, not with Annata, but in other scenarios, where those customers have focused principally on the customer journey and have focused primarily on how to augment certain stages or maybe stitch together something from marketing through showroom sales experience and delivery. But what those businesses have found pretty quickly is that while the customer journey can be orchestrated, in many cases, the customer-facing business processes need to be coupled to real-time activities in back office systems. So, for example, having up-to-date information about vehicle inventory, not only what's on site, but what's coming in, current status, maybe not only new inventory, but pre-owned as well. Real-time parts availability is another great case. If you're trying to predict the availability of service person and the bays and the tools to repair, but you also need to have a good forecast for the availability of the part to complete the job. And so while you can stitch together the front end experience pretty seamlessly, we found a lot of cases where our customers are interested in picking areas of operational transformation that are required in order to feed those consumer experiences. The assets that you've created with Annata 365 and give you considerable choice in helping those customers grow beyond just the customer journey, but also creating those real-time systems in the back end that power the journey and set and allow the customer's expectations to be met.
I mean, it's certainly the case, John, that our initial experience was building the back end, and the focus was very much on the device. But more and more, we understand that the customer engagement, the customer journey is actually the key focus. And it's this idea that the monetization of the car production or the user experience will evolve, and the traditional model of production, importation, delivery, service is changing. We've seen some mobility cases that have actually accelerated over the past few months. But I think it's important to recognize that when you're building that process, you also need to account for what currently exists, because the current distribution method or monetization of cars is not going to change anytime soon. So it's the ability to blend and have a hybrid model, which I think is key.
As we look at the transformation of automotive, the introduction of new mobility services, that sort of meta theme or transformation factor in the marketplace is going to create an opportunity for businesses to innovate. And in that environment, it's important to recognize that there's not a switch that's going to be flipped at some point where we go from a market which is broadly driven globally around private ownership models to suddenly switching kilometers driven to kilometers consumed in a mobility service. We're going to be in this hybrid state for quite a while. And the sort of technologies that support creating flexible process and creating sockets in which to introduce new experiences to customers, I think will be a key differentiator. The sort of hybrid capabilities that Annata has created with Annata 365 enable those businesses that are introducing those technologies to solve the customer journey or operational concerns in a private purchase, private ownership model, also have the opportunity to insert new mobility experiences inside that same customer journey. So from a very practical standpoint, a dealer could introduce, as Brynborg has, for example, new rental services, and not only just standard rental, but different rental scenarios, which can be joined with the same experiences that Brynborg's delivering on the retail side. Then from an implementation view, what we see fundamentally, if we expect that the industry is going to transform over time and we need to have some flexibility about introducing and experimenting with new consumer experiences, those sockets that you can create in mobile applications, for example, the consumer sees, or the experience that a salesperson or a mobility service advisor has in the tools that he or she are using, will need to have the flexibility to have new kinds of offerings created and exposed. And the fabric that you've created technically with Annata 365 allows for those sort of adaptations or creates those sockets for future innovation, which then allow the business to experiment and do that by still taking advantage of the same fundamental investments that were made during this first stage of transformation.
Well, John, I mean, it's been really interesting talking to you today. We are seeing pretty much across the world with all the different OEMs, all the brands, the same challenges are being faced. They're being overcome in slightly different ways, but I think we've got a good idea of what the best practices are. Maybe so we can sit down again and go into some of these specific areas in a bit more detail. and maybe call out the things that Microsoft and Annata are doing through listening to our customers and through building solutions, which can help other customers to also meet these new challenges and build new opportunities together. So thank you very much, John.
Yeah, thank you, David. And as we look at the beginning of Microsoft's new fiscal year, the last 6 months in particular, the last 12 have had some significant challenges. And I wanted to congratulate you and the rest of the Annata team on the way that you've cultivated customer relationships, the way that you've met the obligations and sort of the spirit of the types of relationships that Microsoft has and that Annata is augmented with Annata 365. So really appreciate all the work that you've done and the great customer successes that we've helped to build together in the marketplace.